welcome back to Kerbal Kolonization with Bogatir. And today, we've got something special on the agenda. We're going to another world for the first time. But before we do that, we've got a little housekeeping to take care of. We've got some contracts to launch mapping satellites to both the Moon and Minmus, so that's what we're going to do. Now, something I've kind of encountered with this playthrough is when you're playing a Kerbal career mode, there is a whole lot of housekeeping or just minor contract missions that are not particularly entertaining or interesting really to watch, if I'm perfectly honest, that I don't really want to subject the viewers to. So what we're going to do is probably at the beginning of the episode, I'm going to try to recap any of these minor missions that I did, give you a quick overview of what happened, just so you know what I'm doing, what, you're not completely lost. But we're going to try to focus on the big missions. But right now, we're sending this mapping satellite out to the Moon, getting it set up for a nice polar orbit. I'm really fat on Delta V, so, instead of combining maneuvers, I just go ahead and get myself into the polar orbit and then break into the parking orbit. Yeah. Oh well. Get a little sloppy sometimes when you've got plenty of Delta V, but especially with these tiny rockets, you'll often find yourself with a whole lot of Delta V to spare just because they're so tiny, they're so lightweight. It just doesn't take a whole lot of gas to make them go a long distance. So here we're set up into our orbit around the Moon, and I take a look at ScanSat, and wow, that's pretty nice track. And yeah, there's the Moon. I don't even have the dish pointed at the Moon, but hey, it works anyways. So, and as I kick the speed up here, I notice this is quite possibly the most perfect ScanSat track I have ever put together. There's no missed slivers. I've got a nice big swath of new territory being covered with each pass. As far as a ScanSat orbit goes, they don't get any better than this. And I couldn't do it again if I tried, because I have, and I fail spectacularly every time. This one, just beautiful accident. So now we're going to go and do the same thing for Minmus. And I'm using the same rocket because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And really, if your spacecraft can make it to the Moon, it can make it to Minmus. So here we are, getting ourselves up in orbit. This time I don't break one of my comm dishes. And launching at night. Now, one of the peculiarities of going to Minmus is Minmus has about a 6-degree orbital inclination around Kerbin. So unless you time your launch perfect to coincide with Minmus crossing the plane of the equator, you got to do a little plane change maneuver. And even though this maneuver costs about 250 meters per second at Delta V, because of how low Minmus's gravity is, you still wind up needing less Delta V to get to Minmus and land than it takes to get to the Moon. So here we are, getting our intercept course plotted and having to tweak it, trying to loop it around the Moon and avoid its gravity well. Takes a little bit of tweaking to find the right orbit, but there we go. And off we go. Again, this tiny little rocket, even though the LV-909 is not really a powerhouse, because of how small this rocket is, it just takes off like a shot. So, once again, I go ahead and get myself into a polar orbit before getting myself into a parking orbit. Just bad habits just start to build up when you've got these high Delta V rockets. And here we go. Can I get as pretty a ScanSat setup? And the answer is not even close. Now, this is a much more normal ScanSat track for me. Now, one of the things about Minmus is because of the ideal ScanSat altitude is so high, Minmus actually rotates underneath you a great deal, which is why that track is so slanted. And you'll see on the return track, they're very slanted. And it's not terrible. It'll get mapped eventually, but it's not pretty. And here's one of the things that I found out real quick about Strategia. We put a ship into Minmus orbit for the first time, and Strategia annihilated the world first cash bonus that would have normally come from putting a ship in orbit of Minmus for the first time. It just wiped them out. And the reason is that right now, my strategic goal is to land land Kerbals on the Moon, not go gallivanting around Minmus. So, yeah, there goes all my funds. But let's go to the Moon. This rocket is a bit more Kerbal than I'd usually like for launching. But I got the rocket built, I got everything assembled, and my Delta V budget was a lot tighter than I was comfortable with. So I did the old Kerbal standby and slapped a few boosters on it. So there you go. Solid rocket boosters just to give me an extra 400, 500 meters per second of Delta V. Right now, at this point in the tech tree, I only have 1.25 meter fairings unlocked, and the 1.25 meter fairing can't stretch around that big lander that I've got sitting there on the front end. So I'm taking a much more vertical launch profile, because that lander on the front is going to create a ton of drag. So if I try to make my pitch over maneuver too low, just air resistance is going to drag me down, and I'm going to wind up digging into the ocean. Here we set up for a lunar intercept and get ourselves ready to go. So I've got this transfer stage. Is actually a pretty big transfer stage, and look at that. That is just beautiful. Definitely like taking pictures. But I'm going to collapse in the solar panels because I'm still not 100% certain about their acceleration tolerance. And overshoot slightly, but I got a ton of Delta V. And I transfer some of the fuel forward just to make the ship handle a little better, get the mass towards where the reaction wheels are. So there we go, fine tune the orbit. And I've actually got a brand new scientific instrument. It's the irradiance scanner. And this is actually the second time I'm recording this audio, because somehow it got corrupted the first time around. And I actually went and looked up exactly what an irradiance instrument is. And what it does is it measures essentially the brightness of the various wavelengths of light coming off of the surface, which would let you know what kind of minerals and basically what the rough composition of the surface is. That's what an irradiance scanner is. A spectral irradiance is the technical term for it. So there you go. There's your I learned something for the day. So here we are, got ourselves out to the moon, and we are plotting to get ourselves down to a nice low parking orbit, because obviously we want to land, and I like to use as much of the Delta V out of this transfer stage as possible before I have to go over to my lander. So just getting ourselves set up and fire up that engine and get ourselves into a parking orbit. And I really do love these early career mode missions, just because those little 1.25 meter parts, everything feels a little more jerry-rigged, everything feels a little more fragile and unsure. There's a much bigger sense of you're just out here in the great beyond, in this huge empty void of space, really embarking on something that's kind of dangerous and risky, and it feels good. It's very fun. I mean, the big missions later on with the large craft that are very complex and capable are nice too, but you know, I got a special place in my heart for these little ships. So since we're high over the moon, we're going to go ahead and do a little science out here before we swing around down close, because we won't get another opportunity to do this until after we lift off. And unfortunately, there used to be a community, what was it called? A community science resource pack or something. Essentially, it was everybody got together and put together literally hundreds of different potential science reports. And it was really enjoyable because you'd hardly ever get the same science report twice. Unfortunately, they changed something about the way the science reports are parsed, and so the community pack no longer works, and apparently they're not really sure how to get it working, which is really sad, because a lot of the stock science reports get very boring very quick. So here we are, putting ourselves into a parking orbit. Going to finish it off with the engines on the lander, but it doesn't take very much to get ourselves where we want to be. So from here, it's time to find ourselves a landing zone. And we're actually going to find a good one right off the bat. And parking over this big crater, we're going to set ourselves up a maneuver node that's going to drop us out here onto this open plain. And I'm going to short it just short of these craters because of the rotation of the moon, plus the way you bring the craft down means I'm going to short it. And I'm hopefully going to land on the wide open plane near the craters. So deploy the landing legs. I'm just double checking my Delta V, bringing in my panels. If I have a rough landing, I don't want to lose my solar panels. So get those tucked safely away as we get ready to set ourselves down. And back in the day, I'm going to pull out one of those old codger back in my day. But back in the day, your Kerbals couldn't automatically hold the retrograde vector, which is what I told Val to do. We just told Val, keep it on the retrograde. And you'd have to fly the retrograde vector yourself all the way to the ground. And it could get dicey because you would not hold it perfectly. You'd find yourself getting down close to the ground, and you might have a couple meters per second horizontal velocity across the ground, which if you land with a couple meters per second horizontal velocity, that'll tip your craft right over. But Val, on the other hand, since she is a professional Kerbal can quite easily keep the rocket perfectly on the retrograde vector, so that essentially all you have to do now is just ride the throttle to the ground. As I'm bringing it in, I'm not messing with anything but the throttle. I'm keeping my eye on the surface information pane off to the side, as well as my Delta V, and I am just letting Val keep it on the retrograde while I play with the throttle. And this information pane, the surface information, well, actually all this information that I've got up right now, the vessel information, my Delta V status, the surface info, is all information I really wish they'd bake into the game stock. Because if you take a look at the surface information pane right now, my altimeter is reading sea level, which is about 5.5 kilometers right now. But my actual distance to the ground is less than 2 kilometers. And that's because I'm landing in an elevated area. And if you did not know that from previous experience of landing on the moon, you would find yourself all of a sudden getting down this low and realizing, oh no, I'm still going 300 meters per second, and I've only got less than 1,000 meters to stop. End result, you're going to pancake into the ground. That to me is not really good gameplay. Okay, a whole little rant aside, we're coming down here nice and slow, bleeding off the last of the speed because I just want to let it fall gently under the effect of the moon's gravity. And we're bringing it in nice and low, getting down these last few meters. And your landers would have a pretty decent crash tolerance. I mean, I could slam this thing into the ground probably about 3 to 5 meters per second and it would survive. But I'd rather set it down nice and gentle. And oh, there we go. Get that achievement from the achievement mod that I have installed, apparently. I actually need to go back through and look through. I didn't even realize I had that mod installed. Must have just been one of those as I'm looking through. I was like, oh yeah, sure, why not? Throw that in there. But get our solar panels deployed and our communications antenna deployed. Turn on the lights and get set for Val to come out and take the first steps on the moon. Now, because of the way that the pilot shuffling around worked out, Val gets to be the first, not Jeb. That's how we're going to play it. I'm not going to play favorites on this one. Valentina, Jeb, or whatever pilot's in the queue, they're going to get to be the first wherever we're going. So Valentina takes her first steps out onto the surface of the moon and takes a nice look back at Kerbin, while I try not to clip through the ground and have it look terrible. And we get away from the ship so that when we take off, the blast doesn't clear out our flag. And we whip that flag out and get it set up. I'm really glad I figured out how to make a custom flag because, yeah, I like that. The Bogatyr on the moon. And our auspicious first landing on the moon in true Kerbal style. Way to go, Val. But she makes sure to drag Bill into this. Or she will. Yeah, post-commentary, sometimes it's not always quite as on spot as you might like. So, there we go. Get her flag put out there. And now it's time to get Bill out of this. Oh, right. EVA report and surface report. And these are two of the things that surface sample. These are two of the big reasons you want to make manned landings on locations. Because surface samples and EVA reports from the surface are worth a massive amount of science. So now we're getting Bill out. And I could have gotten Bill out of his lander can, but the problem is the way that lander can works, he would have come out hanging horizontally and directly over a solar panel. I might have been able to catch him, hit his jetpack, and get away and not crash him through the solar panel, but transferring up to the command pod is just that much easier. So, have our little photo op moment. And now it's time to get down to the real work, because the Surface Exploration Pack, is that what it's called? Yeah, the Surface Exploration Pack is in the save, and I actually have brought it along with me. All those scientific instruments. And I really get a kick out of this particular mod because this is essentially what they did when they went to the moon our moon for the first time. The astronauts had a whole bunch of science experiments that they placed out on the surface and left there so that they could take continual readings after they left, because just like our mission here, we're going to land, we're going to set out the experiments, we're going to take some readings, then we're going to get right back on and blast off. We're not staying for any great amount of time. Now, and this is the reason that I have a 2-man ship for this first landing, is because I need an engineer to build this. You need an engineer with the ability to repair, I think is what they're looking for, is the repairability. So here we get the base station thrown out, and now we're going to start grabbing science experiments and everything else. And this mission is actually also going to bring up a shortcoming in my 2-man design. And the reason is, when I tested this out, I tested it out in the sandbox game. And in a sandbox game, you have everybody defaults to the highest experience level for your Kerbals. So I had absolute top level engineer, absolute top level scientist, and when I was doing the testing, everything worked out just fine. There was no issues. I didn't see any reason that I'd need multiple people. And here we go. Got most of it set up on the surface. Everything, as you can see, is plugged back into either this battery, which is then plugged back into the base station. And here's where I found out the downside. I hit the calibration, and it came out very, very low. And, if you're honest about it, it makes sense. Bill's an engineer. He's not a scientist, so he's not going to have the experience and the practical knowledge of getting everything fine-tuned. But it really kills the science rewards from this. So right here, I am immediately already thinking about the fact, okay, I got to get 3 men on the surface. I need a pilot, I need an engineer to build it, and I need a scientist to calibrate it. So future plans already. Right now, everybody's going to pile back in aboard the ship. So everybody's piled back aboard, and we're going to run the science experiments. And I packed in everything that I possibly could to bring it along on this trip. So far, nothing we haven't seen before. Still taking the temperature and pressure readings in a vacuum, which again, you got to admire that Kerbal persistence, because by this point, somebody should have figured out it's a vacuum. You're not going to get readings, but they still do it. So we're going to take all these readings that we possibly can, including some magnetometer data. Get that stowed away. You don't really need to, since we're on an airless moon, but it never hurts to do it anyways. So one last crew report, and double check my instruments. Just checking everything before I go. The surface experiment package is working. We are fat on life support. The moon is not too far away. I think the total mission elapsed time for a normal moon mission is 2.5 days, 3 days maybe. So the life support we brought along is plenty. And as always, before launch, we're going to stow away our solar panels and our communications system. I'm taking one last look around, just be absolutely positive that I've got everything done. Because the last thing you want to do is hit the gas to go home and then realize, oops, I've missed half my science experiments or something along those lines. So everything gets tucked away, and we are ready for launch. And we are off. Get ourselves popped up real quick, orient on the eastern vector, and kick in the gas. And I have not remembered to put on stability assist, so I look like a drunken idiot during my takeoff. So here we go. Track the landing legs. We're making good time. We're well clear of the site. And I get my panels organized. Dump off the side fuel tanks. And get ourselves set back up into cruise mode. So everything's looking pretty good. We're actually going to go into a parking orbit before we make our burned return to Kerbin. Sometimes you can take off and make the burn directly, and Can't remember when I did one of those or not, but yeah, we're going to take off, get ourselves into roughly a parking orbit, and then very quickly kick ourselves back to Kerbin. So everything's looking good. Trim it up a little bit so that my periapsis is nice and low so that I don't bounce back. And, you know, it would suck to travel all the way to the moon and then bounce back out of the atmosphere and have to spend another, what, that'd be like 5 or 6 hours waiting to come back down. At that point, you really do start to get into a danger of running out of electrical charge. But regardless, here we go. Suck up all the relevant science data into the science container. I love that part so much, because previously, in order to do that, I'd have to take I'd have to go EVA and physically remove all the data from all the instruments and then store it back in the command pod, which was kind of a pain. So here we are coming back in, and I figure, you know what, I'm fat on Delta V. I literally could have left those SRBs at home and still come back with about 100 meters per second. But you know what, I figure, you know what, I'll burn off as much of this fuel as possible. Take a look at that altimeter. I am already well inside the atmosphere. And here's the moment that I kind of go, whoops, as I realize I'm getting re-entry effects. So quickly turn back on the battery for the command pod so I'll get authority with the SAS. Roll the pod off the front of the service module, and then bounce off the solar array on my way back down. So smooth, so smooth. So, and it's just a pretty standard re-entry. Even coming back from the moon, your velocity is not high enough that it's ever really going to challenge this 1.25 meter ablator. I'd really at some point intend to try to see just how hot a re-entry I can make, probably coming back from interplanetary space, and have one of these heat shields, well, fail. So, and there we go. Splashdown. We are home, back on Kerbin. Beautiful. And just real quick, I want to show you the interior view. This is that Kerbal can. Yeah, I love this part. Great way to bring them along. And it just looks real nice on the inside, too. Looks kind of cozy. So, all that being said, time to head back home. And as you can see, these science rewards are considerable. There is a ton of science being brought back from this single mission onto the surface of the moon. And the best part is the surface experiments package is, over time, admittedly a lot of time, going to start kicking back more and more science. So Bill's up to level 1. Valentina gets a little more experience, along with those very highly prized first Kerbal on the Moon ribbons. So Final Frontier, and just another one of those little mods that I enjoy a lot. In fact, I've really got to remember on the next video to open up the whole tab and show you how it keeps track of this for all of your Kerbals. So, yeah, just going through all those ribbons. And now the contracts. And since we have completed the Moon mission, now a lot of other possibilities as far as probes and manned missions open back up. And we collect a lot of money for all those completed strategies and missions, including our big monstrous bonus from Strategia for our firsts on the Moon. And it's time to spend some of that delicious science. Now, the heavier rockets is kind of a no-brainer, just because of what we're going to be trying to do. Eventually go to Minmus, build bigger rockets. We're going to want that. And then also the ladders, the biome scanner, the telescope, science experiments are what you want. And again, another science experiment. You want to get as many of those as quickly as possible. And the relay antenna is going to be necessary because we're going to be looking to go interplanetary before too long. And we really need those relays so we can start setting up a proper comm network. So take some of the science parts, and there we go. And before we go, I want to take one last look at this surface experiments package, because it has barely begun to do what it does. I don't really know what happened here with the textures. I don't know why we got this ugly low-res texture, but as you can see, it's been sitting on the ground for quite a while, and it's popped out very, very little science. and not just because it's the middle of the night, but most of these experiments on the surface experiments package will take 40, 50, 70 days to fully complete. So it's not something that's going to immediately yield science, but on down the road, it actually does start to kick out a lot of science. And that's where we stand. We've made our first moon landing with Valentina. We're getting ourselves a lot of science. And I'll catch you guys next time. It's been Bogatir.